Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the Surrey Board of Trade. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade and an honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy appointed by the National Defence Minister. Thank you so much for attending today's event with our honorable keynote speaker, the Minister of Climate Change and Environment Strategy, in a dialogue with the Honourable George Heyman. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the treaty territory of the Tsawwassen First Nations and the unceded territory of our Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, events like this don't happen without sponsorship support. Thank you so much to our co-presenting sponsor, BC Hydro. And our business and international trade center sponsors are the law firm of Fasken, the Business Development Bank of Canada, BDC, and the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, represented by S&F Benefits. I'd like to recognize some government officials that are on the event call with us. They are Jagrup Brar, MLA for Surrey Fleetwood, representing Trevor Halford, MLA Surrey White Rock, is Effie Cerise. His Worship, Rob Vagramoff, Mayor of Port Moody. City of Surrey Councillors, Linda Annis, Brenda Locke, and Stephen Pettigrew. And I'd also like to recognize Frank Flood, Consul General of Ireland, based in Vancouver. Thank you so much for attending. Ladies and gentlemen, just a couple of comments. All attendees are muted. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat function of the technology. If we're not able to get to your question, we will send you an answer after the event is over. About the Surrey Board of Trade, we are Surrey's city building business organization where we support business and bring business into the city. We are the top 10 largest chambers of commerce, boards of trades in Canada. There's 450 of us that have been supporting our business sectors and ensuring that we are a concierge of connection and instigating change at the different levels of government. The Surrey Board of Trade has British Columbia's only rapid response pandemic business center supported by the BC government. We're one of 9 organizations that sit on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. And we're part of the COVID-19 Industry Engagement Table as led by our Economic Recovery Minister, Ravi Kahlon. And we have a direct line into the Prime Minister's office to do the very same thing, to identify gaps and opportunities for the business community during the pandemic and beyond the pandemic. Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia by 2030. And there are so many exciting things happening in our city. And I encourage you to learn more about our city on our website at businessinsurrey.com. Surrey is definitely an opportunity city. And with that is our great partner, BC Hydro, that is really enabling a positive partnership within our city and for our business community. And I'd like to invite now Marianne Berkey. She is the manager of projects and the regulatory group in environment for BC Hydro to say a few words. Marianne, over to you.
Thank you, Anita. On behalf of BC Hydro, it's my pleasure to introduce your keynote speaker. I work for an organization that generates 98% of our power from clean and renewable resources. We're one of the cleanest utilities in North America. And we believe this is a huge opportunity to help others reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by increasing electrification, whether by the cars we drive or other facets of our transportation system, how we heat our homes, or through our industrial processes. All of us have a role to play in slowing down climate change, and Minister George Heyman has been at the forefront of that challenge for some time. Your keynote speaker was first elected as the MLA for Vancouver-Fairview in 2013. Since 2017, he served as the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, and previously served as the Opposition Spokesperson for Environment, Green Economy, and Technology. In 2020, he also became the Minister responsible for TransLink. Since he was appointed the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, he dedicated himself to advocating for the people and the environment against climate change. He created the CleanBC plan to reduce air pollution while creating more jobs and economic opportunities for people, businesses, and communities in the renewable energy sector. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the Honourable Minister George Heyman.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and thank you, Anita. It's my pleasure to acknowledge that I'm joining everyone from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It is great to be here to discuss climate action and a clean economy in British Columbia, and I'm sure you're going to have some very specific comments and questions about Surrey. It is important, and we see all the time now when jurisdictions take up the challenge of climate change that it is clearly linked to the economy. As President Biden says to the South, jobs, jobs, jobs. I know the Surrey Board of Trade has been an important advocate for climate action and to ensure that businesses remain competitive as we take the ongoing transition to a clean economy and a cleaner economy. You've also been strong advocates for reducing plastics pollution. I think we all know that the business environment has changed extremely quickly in the past year or two. And it's not just the COVID-19 impact, as strong and hard and devastating as that has been in many ways. I also want to thank the business community for the tremendous work you've done in working with our government and other governments to address the COVID crisis at every level. But part of what we're seeing internationally, we're seeing businesses take it up, we're seeing nations around the world take it up, we're seeing banks in the investment community take it up, is a realization that as we invest to rebuild our economy, we have an opportunity to rebuild in the shape that we all have talked about wanting to see in the future. A shape that takes climate action seriously, that takes steps toward transforming our resource industries, building out our clean tech sector, and ensuring that all businesses have a chance to become cleaner and lower emissions. Recently, we saw a coming together of nations around the world in the Earth Day Summit. Our federal government, the United States administration, countries from the European Union all came together to raise our collective climate ambition, as we need to. We all know that unchecked, climate change will not only have environmental impacts that are devastating, they'll have community impacts that are devastating, economic impacts that are devastating, and they will heap costs on taxpayers and local governments that will be virtually impossible to meet. Surrey is an important center in British Columbia and has an important role to play. You're home to a number of innovative clean tech companies, whether it's BC Hydro's Power Tech Labs, one of the largest testing and research labs in North America, working on a variety of problems. There are also key institutional resources like Simon Fraser University's Surrey campus and the Sustainable Energy Engineering Program and Fuel Cell Research Lab. We in BC are in an excellent position for the opportunities ahead. We have been developing and will continue to develop solutions for a world that's in transition to a cleaner future, as well as providing low carbon commodities that are a result of having had a carbon tax since 2008 and having programs in place to encourage decarbonization. Part of our budget this year is to continue to invest in CleanBC. Our program, as I've said, is both a program to reduce carbon emissions, but also to build a cleaner, healthier, stronger, sustainable economy with lots of jobs throughout BC. It's a core priority for our government, and that's reflected in the fact that it's mentioned in the mandate letter of every single minister. So in addition to investing in people, in healthcare, and in our response to COVID-19 and investment in recovery, we also have $500 million invested in CleanBC programs that brings our total investment over 5 years in CleanBC to around $2.2 billion. We're investing in zero-emission vehicles, charging stations, active transportation infrastructure, assisting the technology sector, and electrifying school buses, ferries, and government fleets. Removing the PST on e-bikes. And e-bikes have an important role to play in lowering transport delivery costs for the last mile, the last couple of miles, whether it's food or goods and services. So we're enabling small businesses to take this great transition. We have significant investments in addition to what I've mentioned in industry and clean tech. The new InBC or Investment BC Corporation is going to provide tremendous stimulus for those the mid-range building up of capacity investment dollars that are needed by tech companies to commercialize, expand, and fill the need for clean technology products around the world with investment that happens in BC instead of from Silicon Valley, followed by an invitation to pull up roots and relocate after a business has become successful. That's going to be key to our future. We're also investing in more energy efficient homes, buildings, and schools, as well as climate preparedness and adaptation. We have a strategy that we'll be releasing shortly because we know that we need to help communities, which in turn helps businesses and people adapt to the changes that are happening and that we can't avoid. As part of the first phase of our Stronger BC economic recovery, we had a number of initiatives that built on CleanBC, they built on our plastics action plan, they built on habitat and watershed restoration, as well as providing jobs for young people and support for industry. We were very clear in our cabinet discussions. We needed to maintain a climate focus and a jobs focus at the center of our recovery investments. So as I said, we have $500 million in new CleanBC funds to accelerate the progress, and we're making progress. We're leading North America in electric vehicle take-up. We were well ahead of our targets for new light-duty vehicle sales being zero emission. We're at 9% and our 2025 target is 10. So we will be able to be even more ambitious than the 2040 target we set for 100% sales when we released the plan in 2018. And that will be our experience, I think, with home energy and commercial building energy efficiency. There is a momentum that's building. We have goods and products and innovators in BC that can help us exceed our initial ambitions. We're providing charging stations around the province to support infrastructure, and we're doing a lot of that in Surrey. We're well on the road to net zero energy by 2032, and we're building an energy efficient school in South Newton that will emit nearly 90% less carbon pollution than typical. We're a leader in the green building sector. And the Vancouver Economic Commission points out that in the Metro Vancouver region alone, clean energy retrofitting and construction has a market value capped at or noted at about $3 billion. And that is just, as they say, the tip of the iceberg, or a conservative estimate. We have 12 mass timber demonstration and research projects in the Metro Vancouver area alone. We have LEED buildings, we have passive house, and we have mass timber, and we will have more. And these opportunities will only increase as CleanBC policies come into full force. A really important part of our plan is expanding and planning for public transit infrastructure that will reduce congestion, that will move people, that will support development and housing in the region, and aid businesses. And that's why we're committed as a priority to building the SkyTrain all the way to Langley and continue to invest in TransLink for the Metro Vancouver area. We've made it clear to our federal government that that is a top priority for the BC government. As I've mentioned, we have tremendous opportunities in industry and clean tech to meet the changing values of the world around us. The global financial world has now made it crystal clear. Environmental, social, and governance goals have to be core to company decisions and investment decisions. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero is led by Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. It includes 160 financial institutions with $70 trillion in assets that are pledged to cut emissions and to move to net zero by 2050. We've recognized this in British Columbia. We've pledged to add to our climate legislation the need to be net zero by 2050. Companies with net zero commitments already represent nearly 40% of companies' emissions from large industry here in BC. They're making the move. They recognize they need to do that for investment. Just as companies like Blackwater have said, if you want our $9 trillion in investment dollars or any of it, show us your plan to reach net zero. So we have projects in BC like battery electric mine haul trucks, energy efficiency improvement for greenhouses, work on net zero carbon cement, better technology for pulp mills, oil and gas operations. We know that this next generation of projects is going to invest in advanced clean technology for tough to solve emission problems. We need to do that. We've already picked the easiest fruit. The next steps are harder, but they also hold out great economic opportunity for our tech sector. And we're funding that by our CleanBC program for industry. We're rewarding with the industrial incentive program large emitters who come close to or meet or exceed the world-leading benchmarks in carbon intensity. We have a large part of the carbon tax paid by these businesses devoted to the industry fund, which takes applications from industry for application of carbon emission reducing technologies. This is a boon both for the industries. It helps them capitalize the changes they need to make, ultimately pay less carbon tax, and support the tech sector in British Columbia. And BC Hydro, thank you very much. We're electrifying heavy industry. Therefore, by lowering the electricity rate and the reduction of cost to connect to the grid. This will make a huge difference in emissions in British Columbia. There's lots more to speak of. I mentioned briefly the climate preparedness and adaptation strategy. You'll hear more about phase 1 of that in the weeks to come. We need to build on the good work we've already undertaken in Surrey and the Metro Vancouver area. We've begun action on the Plastics Action Plan and supporting cities like Surrey and reducing the use of single-use plastics in our community and your community, as well as cleaning up our coastline from junk plastics and derelict vessels. Lots more to do. Government has a key role to play, so do businesses and communities, and more importantly, we all need to work together for this clean transition. Thank you for listening to me, and hopefully I haven't talked on for too long. I know this was meant to be a forum for discussion, and I look forward to trying to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Minister, and so appreciative of you speaking to the Surrey Board of Trade. My first question to you is related to a hot issue in Surrey related to a road called 84th Avenue, and it's in our Bear Creek Park, and some of the implications and those are being assessed is that the road is going to go over 2 streams, both fish bearing, etc. What is the role of the British Columbia government when cities face these types of environmental impacts as a result of road expansion, road construction?
Well, our first role is to be very careful that we don't step on a municipality's and local government's jurisdiction. In some cases, a project being proposed by a local government will either, if it's large enough, trigger an environmental assessment. In some cases, it may relate to impacts on the Environmental Management Act. In some cases, there may be impacts on acts under federal jurisdiction. We would have to see the specifics of the project and know whether the project itself triggered a review under any provincial government legislation and regulations. I'm sure the city is aware of what those are and would make application if that was the case. But I think on a normal basis, absent those factors, as difficult as these discussions are locally, and I know this is not the first time this issue has come up. It's been rejected in the past. It's up for consideration by local government and members of the community, and this is not a time for the province to intervene.
Minister Heyman, I wanted to ask you that, during this pandemic, Surrey has been so lucky. Our development and construction sector has been thriving. I wanted to ask you about, some developments, not only within Surrey, but in other parts of Metro Vancouver, where a developer is facing an application with their local government, and there is some type of a stream or a water feature, and they need to go through an environmental assessment vis-a-vis the BC government or the Ministry of Environment. And the challenge that some of our developers are facing is that there's no resource at the local government level to help them with that application process. Ours, for example, is gone, that staff resource. And is there an opportunity through your ministry to perhaps increase staff capacity to help those developers navigate, that whole environmental assessment process?
It's a really excellent question, because underlying all of this, of course, is the desire to develop, in many cases, housing, but not just housing, affordable housing, supportive housing, market housing. We know how important that is to density. And so on the one hand, we're trying to link Metro Vancouver future planning with Metro Vancouver future transit planning undertaken by TransLink to ensure that we have plans that work well together, that we're providing both decongested, affordable, accessible transportation and affordable housing for people that is either close to where they live and work. Sorry, it's obviously going to be close to where they live, but close to where they work, or can move them quickly and easily to where they do work. To do that, we know that we need to work with municipalities to make the permitting of that needs to be robust, but not an obstacle. And obviously, time is an obstacle. So there are measures being undertaken in some other ministries to begin to address that. We also know that in terms of environmental reviews, that can't be a disincentive to moving forward with the development. It also has to be sound. And I can't speak to local government's capacity. We have added capacity in the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations for different permitting activity. But we also will never, ever be able to staff up to do all those reviews ourselves. What we do, therefore, is have a robust system in place, and we made it more publicly accountable and transparent when I introduced the Professional Governance Act and a couple of years ago, and we've begun the implementation to ensure that that standards were consistent, that training was adequate of qualified professionals, whether they were engineers, biologists, agrologists, and others, foresters, and to ensure that the public could be assured that issues such as conflict of interest were being properly addressed. That allows us to rely on the assessments done by qualified professionals. We, of course, review the work they submit, and in some cases, we require a couple of opinions. We're also available in the ministry, and this is where we can really help, to give developers and others advice about how to effectively navigate through provincial processes. And I'm sure anything we can do, because we have a mutual interest in ensuring that development can take place in a timely and appropriate manner, as well as a manner that provides encouragement to those people who are in the development sector and meets our community and provincial goals. We need to work with municipalities to do everything we can to not have the approval and permitting process be such a nightmare that nobody in their right mind would want to enter it.
That would be really valuable, especially to our small and medium-sized developers. The larger developers, they have resources to help them, but they just find it very difficult to navigate this whole piece with the BC government. So definitely an opportunity for collaboration. I wanted to ask you about the resource sector. And certainly, for example, we have 108 different businesses that support the mining industry in Surrey, several that support LNG and of course, natural gas, etc. And we were part of a national table with Resource Works. We were the only board of trade that issued a series of recommendations around economic recovery by utilizing those industries related to LNG, gas, etc. What's your perspective about those industries as a pathway to create jobs and towards economic recovery?
In BC, the resource sector has been critical to our success as a province and our growth, and will continue to be for many years to come. Gas is one of those resources, and we, LNG Canada Phase 1, which is providing much of the employment you reference, is a project that made a final investment decision because of dialogue and discussion with our government, both around affordability and opportunity, as well as our commitment to climate goals. We've also been very clear that LNG proponents need to show how they fit within our climate plan. We'll have more to say about that as we flesh out Phase 1 of the climate plan in the fall. But we've also recently announced sectoral targets, including oil and gas. So I have met with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers recently. I've met with representatives of the gas industry over my time in this position. And while a fossil fuel, they are working hard, understanding where society is heading to lower their emissions, to become cleaner, to electrify, to capture fugitive methane emissions as they ultimately transition to the future that we see a couple or more decades down the road where clean energy is filling global needs. We also know that the mining sector, for instance, in BC is providing critical minerals and metals that are crucial to electrification, for instance, in vehicles, to energy production generally, and to do so in a way that makes BC products, BC commodities, which are in many cases the lowest carbon intensity or close to the lowest carbon intensity in the world, the desired product for purchase that could command a premium in a world that is increasingly looking at these measures to meet our collective climate commitments. So we have been working with industry, as I said, through the Industry Fund, investing in technologies, helping businesses by capital investments and application of technologies that will reduce emissions, and working with the federal government for electrification, and encouraging the manufacture of low or zero emission vehicles or other technologies for use by heavy industry. So that both helps our resource sector and our resource industries to compete rather than to be victims of carbon leakage to jurisdictions without a carbon price or without the kind of regulations that we have in BC. It also supports our clean tech sector, whether it's organizations like MindSense or Carbon Engineering that are helping to solve the problem. We are building up both sides of the economic equation by doing that. We are ensuring the longevity of our resource sector, and I continue to have discussions as do staff in my ministry with the Business Council, with associations representing heavy industry to talk about how we meet our joint goals of decarbonizing and remaining competitive in business.
Minister, yourself and the BC government has indicated a significant commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I wanted to ask you about the suspension of the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program. The acronym is CARIP. Do you think that the BC government or the Minister of Municipal Affairs would be looking at reevaluating that decision? It is a mechanism by which local municipalities can reduce greenhouse gas emissions with the private sector.
Well, we are very interested in supporting local communities and their work with the private sector to reduce emissions. We have other programs in place like the Clean Communities Fund. I can't give you a specific answer to your question about CARIP, but I have met and will be meeting with the Minister of Municipal Affairs, who is far more knowledgeable than I am about the appropriate and best programs to assist municipalities and local businesses. We are working right now in the Climate Action Secretariat of my ministry around taking a new look and a new approach to some broader pathways that can get us to our emission reduction targets in 2025, 2030, 2040, and 2050. We know we can't do it without supporting local businesses to do it with us and supporting municipalities to work with local businesses. So I know that's a very general and vague answer, but it's the best I can do today.
Fair enough. I wanted to ask you about your perspective about the carbon tax. We heard the Prime Minister a couple of months ago about his carbon tax goals and why it's valuable. But what's your perspective? Do you think carbon tax costs businesses money? What's the bottom line effect? And where does that revenue actually go?
That's an excellent question. So as you know, the British Columbia government intervened in the recent court case testing the constitutionality of the federal government's carbon tax on behalf and in support of the federal government's right to set the tax, or what the court has now said is more really appropriately termed a regulation on carbon emissions. And we did that because it is not helpful in our view to BC businesses to have a range of standards across the country. It threatens competitiveness across Canadian borders. We already know we have some problems to the south and with other jurisdictions that there are a range of ways to address, and we're looking at them all. So we support the idea of national action and concerted provincial action. Our preference, of course, is to work with other provinces to move climate action programs forward, to look at opportunities to electrify across borders, to achieve economies of scale, to support each other's tech sectors to reduce emissions. I also know that many studies say that putting a price on carbon is generally the least expensive way to reduce emissions because it's less prescriptive than regulations, and it allows industry to look at a range of ways that may be suitable for one and not for another to reduce their emissions. And that's where the CleanBC program for industry that is funded by carbon tax revenue also comes into play. The federal government has said they're going to raise the carbon tax substantially by 2030. It's always been our plan in BC and our preference, which was easy because we had the first carbon tax in Canada, to have a made in BC plan, both about how we're going to collect the tax and how we're going to spend the money to support individuals, small businesses, medium businesses, and large industry. With a higher tax, we need to take another look at how we redistribute that money. We haven't taken it yet because we're not at 2022 yet, but it is squarely on my to-do list. We will continue to meet with industry. I can't remember a meeting with industry where we haven't talked about the carbon tax and how to use it in a fair way and an effective way to reduce emissions and maintain competitiveness. In fairness, I haven't had any meetings with industry where they have questioned whether a carbon tax is useful. What's been questioned is how we can use that money to ensure that they can remain competitive. And my two goals are business remaining competitive while reducing emissions. And I'm sure we can do that. There probably are different ways we can do that with a higher carbon tax to be even more effective and fair. And we'll be examining that and consulting on that significantly in the couple of years ahead.
I wanted to let you know that we've been speaking with Minister Ralston about the following topic, but I wanted to get your perspective as well. We've been advocating to him for a hydrogen demonstration project through the Fraser Valley Heritage Railway with a possible partnership with Ballard Power or another organization, for example. You know, Surrey, right on the border, part of the Cascadia Economic Region, could be the beginning of a hydrogen superhighway, so to speak. Are you open to new and innovative projects like this?
Absolutely. I mean, Minister Ralston's a far better person to talk to me about this. He's more knowledgeable. He's the minister responsible, but obviously hydrogen is an important part of zero emission transportation, particularly in those transportation modes that don't currently lend themselves readily to battery electric. We have instituted a heavy-duty transportation innovation challenge, asking or inviting operators to and technology innovators to tell us what technologies they think are the most likely to yield decarbonization in industrial and commercial transportation. Hydrogen will undoubtedly be part of that. Ballard's a great success story. We're investing $10 million for hydrogen fueling stations, as well as some support for Hydrogen BC. We're ahead of the rest of Canada in our hydrogen fueling network, but having said that, it's still obviously young and not very large. Minister Ralston is very enthusiastic about the opportunity for both hydrogen production in BC, clean hydrogen production in BC, and hydrogen use in BC. And I tag along for the ride, the clean ride.
Minister, I wanted to ask you about your perspective on a federal government decision that took place in December on an aquaculture issue where salmon farming in the Discovery Islands has been ordered to shut down, impacting so many, over 300 businesses, so many jobs. And I'm just wanting to ask you, I know Minister Kalon, we've been in touch with him on this and as well as the federal government. There is going to be a significant impact to associated jobs and businesses as a result of the closure of salmon farming on the Discovery Islands in that Vancouver Island region. Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I do. First of all, you know, we went through not a similar process. We went through a process with the Broughton Archipelago where there was some real threats to wild salmon identified, where Indigenous nations made it clear that most of them in most locations wanted the farms out. So we underwent a fairly lengthy negotiation with that included workers in the industry, the companies that were operating, and the Indigenous nations, and reached a mutual agreement about a transition pathway and a phasing out. The federal government chose to simply make an announcement. It's their right to do so, but we continue to urge them very strongly to follow that announcement up with a real transition plan on a number of levels. A transition plan for the workers immediately impacted, a transition plan that will do what they say they want to do, which is to transition to land-based aquaculture, which would keep much of the ancillary parts of the industry going, and to ensure that both the operators and the ancillary industry are part of a transition plan. I mean, we obviously want to protect wild salmon, and we want to be respectful of the desires of Indigenous nations. But the way to do it, in my view, and I'll say this with respect to the federal government, I'm not meaning to be overly critical, but I think it's much better when businesses, communities, Indigenous nations, and workers are engaged in a discussion about how to get to a desired end with a fair transition in continued economic activity, rather than drop in, make an announcement, and then deal with the fallout. When people don't know what's happening tomorrow, it's pretty hard to engage in constructive dialogue.
And we would agree with that. And we've been advocating for the salmon farming industry, especially those impacted businesses, which are quite significant in Surrey, at least for a pause, because we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and it's hard to find, a job. And so we haven't heard back yet, but let's see what happens. I wanted to ask you about your perspective about the positive and negative implications of a drive to clean energy and climate policy on jobs in BC. What jobs will it create? What jobs will be lost? Some critics say that the CleanBC plan is really not a plan. It's not an economic plan. It's not a jobs plan. So can you provide your perspective on that?
Absolutely. And my answer to people who say CleanBC is not an economic plan and it's not a jobs plan is you're reading maybe the top 2 or 3 lines of the plan, and you're not delving down into the jobs that are created by in communities all over BC in support of zero emission transportation, in support of the technology sector, in support of applying the technology sector to the resource sector in ways that will help our resource sector thrive by being known for low carbon commodities. This is not a world any longer where people are much interested in buying products that don't respect Indigenous rights, that don't take climate impacts into account, and don't take environmental impacts into account. So whether it's our revamped Environmental Assessment Act, our CleanBC climate plan, our support for clean technology, and our supports to help industry remain competitive as they transition, all of these have both short, medium, and long-term impacts on jobs. It is important to, as people used to say about Wayne Gretzky, see where the puck is going to be. And that's what CleanBC is about. Let me just take one example. We're trying to develop a strategy to do large-scale energy efficiency retrofitting of both commercial and residential spaces around BC in a way that supports the investment in applying those technologies, as well as the development of those technologies without requiring either people or businesses to have massive amounts of capital up front, but repay a revolving line of credit or loan system over time from energy savings. It's been piloted in jurisdictions across Canada and North America. It's called property assessed clean energy. It's not the only way, but we've invested in a pilot project, and we're looking for ways to make it real. The job opportunities of doing that in British Columbia will be massive. They'll be spread out in communities all around BC. They'll build new skills for a whole generation of young tradespeople. They'll provide jobs for Indigenous people. Decentralized energy systems, which we will need to build going forward. Once Site C is completed, we will have massive needs for clean energy around BC as we electrify in 2040 and beyond, and they will no longer consist of large projects. They will likely be new technologies and decentralized developments. All of these will provide construction and maintenance jobs for many years to come. So is CleanBC an economic plan? Absolutely.
Minister, a third of Surrey's land base is agricultural. We're harnessing an agri-tech industry right here in our city. And I wanted to ask you about Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. They have announced $185 million for agriculture climate solutions. CleanBC has strong targets for decarbonization. Is anyone at your ministry looking at opportunities for low carbon nitrogen fertilizers?
I know I can't give you the specifics, but I know there have been discussions between the Climate Action Secretariat and the Ministry of Agriculture, Fish and Food along these lines, both low carbon fertilizer, as well as ways to reduce emissions in the greenhouse sector, ways in which agricultural land can be used to store carbon, and incentives that can be given to help with that, and therefore make the agriculture industry provide another source of income to help it be stable. Minister Popham is far more fluent on these matters than I am, and if you haven't already invited her, you should. She is extremely enthusiastic and bullish on the future of agriculture and wants to see it succeed in communities throughout BC. But clearly, there are a number. I mean, we have three issues here. We have food security for British Columbians. We all know that's important, and we all want to support that. We have opportunities to lower both the carbon impacts of agriculture, as well as the other unintended impacts of agricultural waste from the dairy industry, as well as other parts of the industry. And we're looking at ways to do that and rechannel some of the material that might otherwise be pollution into biofuels. And we're also looking at opportunities for carbon sequestration.
Minister, what is your perspective about, for example, industrial land inventory is diminishing within the Metro Vancouver region? Surrey has the highest amount of industrial land inventory within Metro. But what is the province's role in terms of looking at biodiversity versus built communities? Is there any observance, any attention being paid to the value of biodiversity as an asset?
Well, absolutely, more and more, and that is a significant part, for instance, of the work that's being done by Minister Katrina Conroy and other ministries, including mine on implementing the old growth panel recommendations. It's also part of my ministry's and her ministry's work with the federal government on the recently signed nature agreement. We hope to have some really solid pilot projects announced in the next year or so. There is a line where land use decisions are clearly in the jurisdiction of local governments, but I think we have in the province are trying hard to have a collaborative relationship with local governments and find ways together to encourage both the maintenance of biodiversity, as well as the maintenance of the important ecological services that are actually worth a lot of money, especially if you destroy them and have to replace them, whether it's clean water or clean air. And we know maintenance of an important water features, forestation, and in urban as well as non-urban areas are all part of that. So short answer, yes, and I just gave you the long one.
No, I really appreciate that perspective. There's a policy actually that's been composed by the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce to the BC Chamber of Commerce, and we're a partner in that. So I appreciate your perspective on that. You know, many cities, including Surrey, are really increasing their electric charging infrastructure. Tell me about your perspective on how you balance the need for digital infrastructure for electric vehicles and the grid that's required to support that versus congestion on the road.
It's a really excellent question. People get very excited about electric vehicles and see, we'll just do what we've always done. We'll just do it with electricity this time. But we all know that building road infrastructure is exceptionally expensive. And we know that congestion is a huge problem. For instance, I remember in the debates of around how we should invest in expanding the TransLink network about 7 or 8 years ago. There was an estimate that showed, I think, congestion in Metro Vancouver was costing something like $1.3 billion in lost economic activity annually. That's very significant. So while electric vehicles are part of the solution, accessible, extensive public transit is another very important part of the solution. And we should look for ways to, yes, decarbonize personal transportation, but I know more and more young people in my life don't drive cars, or if they drive them, they drive a car share car, or they use pooled transportation. I'm certainly not suggesting that that we're phasing out automobiles, but if we don't, we're going to have population growth. If we have the same ratio of personal vehicles to population that we've had in the past, it's going to be very expensive, very congested, and not conducive to healthy communities. So we need to support active transportation, rapid public transportation, connected networks across the rapid transportation nodes, effective roadways for effectively used zero emission vehicles. Electric charging infrastructure is part of that, and an important part of that. And the lack of it is an inhibitor to the take up by many people. Not everybody can easily install an electric charger where they live. So we need to have public networks. I'm sure technologies are going to come along. I'm not sure when, that will enable some form of wireless or mass charging, which will be welcome. I know new battery technologies that will have significantly more storage capacity are all coming along, and eventually we'll have to build the electricity capacity to support electrification of industry and transportation. But that's a good problem to have.
My last question to you is, as you know, Surrey has the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia. Do you see the BC government looking at maybe even in Surrey, creating a center of excellence around clean energy manufacturing that'll create long-term jobs?
I could certainly see that happening. I'm certainly not in a position to promise the center of excellence in Surrey, but we are preparing to invest in a center for innovation and clean energy. No decision about where to site it has been made, and it won't be the last institution or center that will be devoted to innovation in energy, in carbon reducing technologies, or in others. And as you've pointed out, Surrey is BC's fastest growing city.
Minister, thank you so much for speaking to the Surrey Board of Trade and to Surrey, where we're going to be the largest city in British Columbia, they're now saying by 2030. Any closing comments by you?
Let me just say, I really appreciated the conversation. I like the question part way more than I like my written remarks part, although hopefully it set the stage. I'd be happy to come back on any specific topic at any time. And I just want to thank everyone for your work in keeping Surrey's economy and community healthy, as well as your work in supporting the community and all of us as we do our best to come out of the COVID pandemic healthy, by getting people vaccinated, and then rebuilding our economy. Some parts of our economy are already doing well, other parts are challenged, and we need to see ourselves as interconnected and build ourselves back together. And we're committed to doing that, and I know we have a partner in the Surrey Board of Trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, and thank you to our co-presenting sponsor, BC Hydro. Ladies and gentlemen, please check out businessinsurrey.com for all of our programs and services to the Surrey business community.